Okay, yay, it didn't lock the wrong way. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and good night, wherever you're in the world. Welcome to my daily YouTube live. We are studying the book of Esther, and currently we are on chapter 6. So while people are coming in, let's just give a quick recap of where we are. So the book of Esther is set in Persia, in which the king, King Xerxes, very powerful king of those times, was ruling, and he swapped out his queen Vashti because of his pride issue, in which she didn't listen to him. So he swapped her out for a new queen, in which he held a beauty pageant in order to find his new queen, and he ended up finding Queen Esther. So Queen Esther is a Jewish woman that is not revealing her identity to the king nor anybody else in the castle, and that was at the discretion of Mordecai. Mordecai was her caretaker that took care of Esther when she was younger. It's actually her cousin, and he was put in the caretaker role because both of her parents had passed away. So Mordecai was the one that led her into this beauty pageant and has been guiding her in this all along. And for those of you that have been following along with this review, we have seen all of the not so coincidental happenings that have been occurring in these chapters, in which Esther was put into such an important position at such an important time, because we then met one of the officials that was promoted by the king, but Haman is the official that was promoted and put into a position of power, and he does not have necessarily good intentions of what he wants to do with his power, as one of his goals is that he wants to destroy the Jewish people. And the coincidence of Mordecai and Esther being amongst them, being amongst the Jewish people, that is actually, it wasn't revealed about their identities until a little bit later. But what are the odds that they were Queen Esther was in a position of ruling when somebody was going to come with an agenda to destroy the Jews? So it appears that they are all kind of in that right place, right time. And without a doubt, although God's name is not mentioned in this book, it appears that God has a very big hand in how things are occurring up to chapter 6. So chapter 5 ended off on Haman coming up with his plan to impale Mordecai before he attends the banquet. So Esther is, of course, going to present to the king her wish that Haman's plan does not go into effect, Haman's plan of destroying the Jews. She wants to she wants to have the king to not allow this to happen. And in doing so, her plan was to prepare a banquet and to not only invite the king, but to invite Haman as well. And there she was going to present her idea of saving the Jews. Unbeknownst to Haman, he doesn't understand how he is a pawn in this plan, so he's actually feeling very arrogant about his invitation. He feels that only the king and I were invited, so obviously I must be of importance. However, all of those feelings of importance meant absolutely nothing to him, because he was so focused on his disdain for Mordecai, in which Mordecai does not bow down to him, nor does Mordecai even fear him in his plan to get rid of the Jews, despite his efforts to make him bow down. So here we are, where Haman goes home and he gets the advice from his wife and his friends and his loved ones, and they said, well, then just get rid of him, get rid of Mordecai, and do it before you go to the banquet. And then that way you could get that weight off of your shoulders and you can attend the banquet in high spirits. So now that brings us to chapter 6. So let's get into it. Chapter 6, the subtitle actually reads, "The King Honors Mordecai," so that gives us a little taste of what is to come. So it says, "That night the king had trouble sleeping, so he ordered an attendant to bring the book of the history of his reign so it could be read to him. In those records, he discovered an account of how Mordecai had exposed the plot of Bigthana and Teresh, two of the eunuchs who guarded the door to the king's private quarters. They had plotted to assassinate King Xerxes. What reward or recognition did we ever give Mordecai for this?" the king asked. His attendants replied, "Nothing has been done for him." "Who is that in the outer court?" the king inquired. As it happened, Haman had just arrived in the outer court of the palace to ask the king to impale Mordecai on the pole he had prepared. So attendants replied to the king, "Haman is out on the court." Wow, another really big coincidence, but we'll get into that a little bit later. "Bring him in," the king ordered. So Haman came in, and the king said, "What should I do to honor a man who truly pleases me?" Haman thought to himself, "Whom would the king wish to honor more than me?" So he replied, "If the king wishes to honor someone, he should bring out one of the king's own royal robes, as well as a horse that the king himself had ridden, one with a royal emblem on his head. Let the robes and the horse be handed over to one of the king's most noble officials, and let him see the man whom the king wishes to honor is dressed in the king's robe and led through the city square on the king's horse. Have the officials shout as they go, 'This is what the king does for someone he wishes to honor.'" "Excellent," the king said to Haman. This is very funny right now because it seemed like Haman had a response very quickly. He was already ready to say how he wishes for that person to be honored. Obviously, because he thought that the king was talking to himself, as he stated, "Well, whom would the king wish to honor more than me?" So he, in his selfishness, is giving the advice of how to honor someone that he really hates, little known to him, unbeknownst to him. So it's very ironic. So excellent, the king said to Haman. "Quick, take the robes and my horse and do just as you have said for Mordecai, the Jew, who sits at the gate of the palace. Leave out nothing you have suggested." Imagine how crunchy Haman's feeling right now. So Haman took the robes and put them on Mordecai, placed him on the king's own horse, and led him through the city square shouting, "This is what the king does for someone he wishes to honor." Afterward, Mordecai returned to the palace gate, but Haman hurried home, dejected and completely humiliated. That's exactly what this man gets. When Haman told his wife, Zeresh, and all his friends what had happened, his wise advisors, okay, wait, now they're wise? Because before they were kind of feeding into his pride, into his own demise, but neither here nor there. And his wife said, "Since Mordecai, this man who has humiliated you, is of Jewish birth, you will never succeed in your plans against him. It will be fatal to continue opposing him." While they were still talking, the king's eunuchs arrived and quickly took Haman to the banquet Esther had prepared. So now his council of people, his loved ones and his wife, are saying abort mission, because clearly Mordecai is loved by the king. So if you now present this idea to impale him or to get rid of the Jews, you're probably going to fail. So maybe you should just leave it alone. We'll see what Haman ends up choosing, which I feel strongly that he's not going to listen to that. And, if you read ahead, you'll see that. But this is a very this is a funny chapter to me, because I feel like it is getting a taste of Haman's own medicine, and a much needed slice of humble pie, to say the least. He came in feeling like he was on top of the world. He had these plans to impale Mordecai, and the king humbled him all the way back to earth. So we're gonna, it's crazy how sometimes we get put into positions where we're in a state of pride and we have this sense of being humbled, and it either makes or breaks us. It can either tell us, slow down, put us on a different track. And I think that a wise person would take that as an example of that, or as a sign to kind of back down, to humble yourself. But it takes a very stubborn and prideful person to keep on going with that pride. So we're going to see the character of Haman and how much his ego really is his complete destruction. And then that is it for chapter 6. I feel like there was something else that I wanted to comment on before we move on to the comment section, and that is the coincidental nature of this chapter. I think it's very important to note that, because like I said, even though God's name is not mentioned, it's obvious that God's presence is very much there throughout this whole chapter, throughout this whole book. Because what are the odds? And that's like, I guess, the overall theme of when I read these stories is I say to myself, well, what are the odds? Because in a regular everyday situation, let's say that this was happening to you, I don't think that these coincidences, quote unquote, would be so highly stacked and so frequent. But in this book in particular, the king just so happens, right as there's another man plotting to impale Mordecai, in the morning. So when does it strike the king to look at this book? It strikes him at night, to the point where he can't sleep. So if he could have slept, then he probably would have never even explored this book of honors. He would have just, kept things moving. But the king, in all of his impulsivity, was forced to slow down by a higher power, and that higher power kept him awake. So then he takes a minute to read this book of honors and see that Mordecai has been on his side the whole time. Mordecai actually prevented him from being assassinated from his other 2 officials that were plotting against him. And Mordecai was never honored for that. They just kept it moving, and then all of a sudden Haman was promoted instead of Mordecai, and Mordecai was gracious. He never complained about it or anything. He just kept on going, and it just goes to show. Also, I think it's very important to note the time between that happening. So when I was doing my research of this chapter, it said that about 5 years have passed since the time that Mordecai was recorded for saving the king, and nothing was done about it. So what are the odds that now all of a sudden the king's thinking about this 5 years later, the day before the presentation of plotting to impale Mordecai? That's God. And, we see God throughout this book very many times. So God's name doesn't even have to be mentioned at this point. We all, as readers and consumers, can pretty much figure that out. So, and then the coincidence of, just as he's thinking, oh my gosh, I haven't rewarded Mordecai. What can I do? And then he hears somebody kind of moving throughout the palace, and he says, who is that? And it just so happens that the person that it was Haman himself. So it's just kind of like, what are the odds that he was in the right place at the right time to be present when the king was going to ask for advice for how to honor this person that Haman so despises. This is 100% divine intervention. And make no mistake, there is no coincidences in the Bible. So that is really all that I have to add to this. I'm going to go ahead and open up the discussion now to the comment section. And if there's anything that you guys would like to add, any questions that you have, let's discuss, and let's do this review together. Oh, wait, I did something wrong. Okay, here we go. Mark Lawson says, indeed, divine intervention. Yes. So Christian says, once again, God's hand is in display by showing favor to Mordecai, and what a humbling experience that was for Haman. At the end, we can also see they know about God's love and favor toward the Jews. Yes, in the end, and it's interesting that they didn't suggest that the last time, but it took for the king to acknowledge his, I guess, acceptance of them that made him say, oh, wait a second, we probably shouldn't touch them. But that's what it takes. It took that cosign for them to fall back. Okay. And I think it's also very important to talk about why everybody is so against the Jews. And that's like a common theme throughout life, right? But just in particular this time. Why do we think, do we think that it's Mordecai's fault more so as to why Haman was in his place and Haman was directly trying to go against the Jews? Or do we think that this is more of a story in order to show how the Jews are protected? And I'm leaning more towards that. I think that it's not really about Mordecai. He just so happened to be like one of the moving factors in order to showcase that point. But the Jews were very much protected throughout history. And of course they were targeted because the Jewish people were the ones that had the covenant with God in the first place. So God said it throughout the Bible. He said that I got your back, you're going to be very protected, and you are going to inherit the promised land. So naturally, the enemy is going to be against those chosen people, so to say, the chosen people that were going to display the powers of God and be that true example. Now, we all know that salvation is for everyone, so it's not just about the Jewish people being the chosen people, but they were chosen in order to display all of these lessons that we now see, especially in the Old Testament. And Mordecai and Esther just so happen to be in a position to further display that point. And that's it. Yes, TK said God favors the Jews. Yes, and it's for that exact reason. So that is it for today. Thank you guys for tuning in. I think that this was a very big turning point for the story in general. We're starting to see that Haman is not as powerful as he thinks that he is. And we're probably going to see him act out in the next chapter, so let's get prepared for that. Go ahead and read ahead to chapter 7 so that when we come tomorrow to discuss, it's the information can be more easily digested. So that is it, and I will see you guys tomorrow, 6 p.m. Eastern time. Ciao.